This is Break Dances with Wolves, Indigenous Pirate Radio.
Yay! You're back.
You're back.
Oh, that's me. I am back.
Yeah.
That's me.
Thank you for doing that. Etana Kunagumsaka, the Amskapakani people. My name is Jossie Ross. I come from the Blackfeet people. My folks also come from the Suquamish Nation, right across the water from here. We are at the Chief Seattle Club. Chief Seattle Club, an iconic place of native gathering within the city of Seattle, obviously named after the great Chief Sealth, who the city is also named after. And we're within the ancestral homelands of the Duwamish people. Of course, Chief Seattle was both Suquamish, from right across the water, as well as Duwamish. And this is one of the places, this area right here, for those folks who do not know, this was all landfill. This was all prime fishing real estate. This is good stuff right here. And, you know, right now we're in the midst, it's what, July 5th, 2018. So this is King salmon season. King salmon season. And this is it's a big time. And it's interesting, like, well, we have these conversations, Chief Seattle Club, Seattle, fishing area, Duwamish people, ancestral fishing village, that there's very few fish left right now.
Right.
I was talking to our friend, this has nothing to do with what we're talking about tonight, but I was talking to our friend, she was on the show a couple of weeks ago. She's the president of the Salmon Defense Organization, Pagan Frank, the daughter-in-law of Uncle Billy Frank, the husband or the wife of Willie Frank, who was also on the show. And the numbers are just disturbing. The numbers are so disturbing. So places like this are really, really important because the reason why folks, native people going back since time immemorial, tens of thousands of years, gathered in places like this is because food was aplenty. There's food. Oh, well, then we're going to be there. And so now this area, this organization right here, Chief Seattle Club, serves as sort of the proxy for that salmon. A reason for natives to gather here because they know they're going to get a meal. Because a lot of times Chief Seattle Club serves natives who are in the most exigent of circumstances, who are the most vulnerable people of one of the most vulnerable populations in the United States, that is homeless and underhoused native people. And so Chief Seattle Club, for those folks who do not know, and if you have an opportunity, please definitely donate chiefseattleclub.org. Donate money, donate resources, clothes, food, all of those things help. But they help to both give those people a place to be clean, take care of themselves, to look for resources like job searches and stuff like that, very important, continue their education, find other skills. They do different kinds of vocational things here. They have a legal clinic here, and I'm not sure what date that is. They have a legal clinic here at Chief Seattle Club. That was, I started, I think, like 2008. And it's just a great organization. And it's a good time, you know, I'm glad to be able to gather here today. So,
You used to serve here?
Yeah, I still serve here.
You still serve?
I still serve here. Yeah, I mean, I come, you know, on, not all the time. Definitely not all the time because they eat too damn early. And, you know, being self-employed is oftentimes a euphemism for I like to wake up late. And, right, and so I come when I can and try to serve food because for a lot of reasons. I mean, I've been blessed beyond belief, and the Native community has, you know, I'm an enrolled member of the Blackfeet Nation, which is in Montana. My family absolutely comes from the Squamish tribe, but I'm not enrolled there yet. The coastal community and the Seattle Native community has taken care of me, made sure I've eaten since I was 13 years old, so I have an obligation to, you know, however I can serve, to make sure I serve. I'm sitting here with some of my favorite people, Breakdance Wolves and Indigenous Pirate Radio. We're in a native place. Can we get a little energy? Okay, thank you, I appreciate it. Sitting here with some of my favorite people, and one of people who hasn't been here in a little while. Favorite people, please introduce yourselves.
I'm Minty Launer. I've missed you all. It's good to see you.
Where you been?
I've been traveling for work.
Okay.
I have this day job. don't hold it against me. And so occasionally my boss prefers that I actually, focus on the day job.
Yeah.
And I did do that.
Right.
But I missed y'all, so it's been a few weeks. And you know me, I'm a long-time Seattleite. I am Santee Creek and Choctaw, and I am the product of grandmothers who are also of African and the West Indian, Caribbean's area, wherever there's been Florida, come on through there.
Yeah.
And apparently my people greeted you really friendly. And we continue, and then my Irish and Scottish people. So I'm mixed race native, and whatever that term is as we do our identity episodes, we're still working through. And what else? I was, raised here in Seattle too. And you're right, the coastal people will take care of Indians. I've been fed my whole life by Coast Salish, Cowichan, Paquichan people. So much appreciated. But who are you? Where have you been?
With your fine ass.
Yeah, looking all good.
Yeah.
Like a snack. Go ahead.
Glad to be here today. Like a snack. This is vulgar. Hamadaki up here. My roach in my chip, but it's good to be here today. My name is Wesley B. Roach. I come from the Coca Nation. The Coca Nation. Also know some German folks, some English, and French as well.
We. Yeah.
Da.
Yeah. All that.
Yeah. Nice question.
Definitely. And we have a very special guest here. And it's a special guest that I've known for a little while. Minty, you've known for a long time.
Yes.
I would love it if you give the full, package of the introduction.
Now she's staring at me and
I want to hear what you got to say. I want to hear what you got to say.
Well, I want everybody to meet my friend Lorena Gonzalez. Lorena is a product of Grandview, Washington. And a civil rights attorney.
Yeah.
And we have gone back 20 years.
Long time.
When we met when we were like 4.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Right.
And now occasionally when she, doesn't have anything else to do, she is the first Black woman to be elected to the Seattle City Council. Yes. And there's more to her, so I'll let her.
Absolutely. Please introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm Lorena Gonzalez. I have the pleasure of being a Seattle City Council member, serving the entire city of Seattle. This is my second term, so I'm excited about being in my third year doing this important work. And I am the daughter of Mexican immigrants from the state of Michoacan, Mexico, who originally came to this country as undocumented immigrants from that state. And I am also indigenous, but my indigenous roots come from Mexican people, from the Aztec culture in particular. So I always find a lot of affinity and just sort of connection with the Native community here in Seattle and across the country, because so much of that exists in my own personal language as well.
Yeah.
And I'm really happy to be here as well.
Thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, one of the things that we want to talk about tonight, and we want to go a few different directions with the conversation, and ultimately whichever way the conversation itself takes us. But one of the things that's fascinating, the actual title or the auspice under which we're working is regarding the separation of families at the border. The separation of families at the border. And we've seen it, it's ugly. It's something that to me has been, I'm simultaneously happy about it because I see people actually being aware of it. But I also am very suspicious about it because I see white people's tendency to only care about it to the extent that it is wrapped up in their anger against Donald Trump. And that's the reason why they didn't care until this point. So that creates opportunity. Oh yeah, we can talk about it, definitely, and maybe we can make some changes. That's good. But then I wonder about attention span. Is that attention span going to be there after Donald Trump, God forbid, dies or, gets rid of,
God
forbid,
anything should happen.
right. Or he's taken out of office or whatever happens. At some point, we know this is a finite amount of time. We know that. And I get suspicious about that liberal attention span. So that I want to go in that direction in a little while. But first, you mentioned the daughter of immigrants. And what I've been noticing a lot with social media and the sort of woke intelligentsia is a sort of a battle of terms that's going on right now. About immigrant versus colonizer versus invader versus settler. And people, we had the rally here last weekend.
Mm-hmm. Last Saturday.
Yeah, last Saturday. And one of the things that was discouraging to me nationwide is the conversation about, well, we're a nation of immigrants. We're a nation of immigrants. I see that a lot. People throwing that around. And I think about that and I'm like, you guys are a nation of immigrants. That's kind of y'all. Don't put that on us. And by that us, I think that would include you.
Yes.
I think that would include other folks who, I was talking to one of my friends, her name is Tess, and she is from the Tohono O'odham Nation, which traverses the so-called Mexican border.
Yeah.
And on one side, her cousins, her aunties, her uncles are considered Mexican. On this side, they're considered American. I don't know if that's an immigrant. I'm not sure. So I just want to open up with that thought. Minty, these definitional games that it seems like we're playing with right now, are they even important? Am I missing the prize? Or do these things actually have value?
I think they have value in that there are people who need to catch up to your level of understanding, my level of understanding, your level. Everybody's at a different place. And for some people, this is a brand new concept or idea for them to start to think about colonization and patriarchy. A lot of folks have not been exposed to that kind of language, that kind of definition, and so yes, I think it's important in that context, but I think it's also important for people like us to be able to bring people even further. I was shocked how many people really genuinely never ever learned that Oregon is Mexico. That idea that people don't know about the shift in slavery in Texas having everything to do with the Los Brazos River. And so if we're not being taught that in school, if we're not being educated about it, we cannot assume that people should just be woke, which I know you can't stand that word, but really we shouldn't assume that everybody's going to be woke without us helping wake them up.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do think the words count for now until we can get people on board.
Councilwoman, what do you think?
I mean, I think, even within the immigrant community, there's a lot of different terms, right? There's a difference between refugees, there's a difference between immigrants,
yeah.
And then it gets really confusing very quickly. And we as a human species, regardless of, where you're from or how you got there,
yeah.
We love labels and we love to put people in categories, right? And so a lot of this is really about that affinity for wanting to put people in categories or putting yourself in a category, because at the end of the day, we all want to sort of be part of something bigger than us, right? And so, I mean, I tend to agree with Minty that I think that there are different levels of understanding and appreciation for how people got here and why they came to this particular place in the world.
Yeah.
And it's important for us to try to figure out how do we thread the needle between the lack of understanding there and sort of where we want to take the conversation in the future. And we have to be willing to listen to each other and sort of accept the level of knowledge that somebody brings to that conversation, even though we get frustrated with it, right? And that's, I think, a big struggle for us right now, is how do we even listen to each other? How do we talk to each other in a way that allows us to really understand and begin to learn?
What do you think, bro?
I'm in regards to that, I mean, a lot of what we're talking about is colonizer versus immigrant, and the difference being a couple hundred years of time in that. And I think it's important to look at history when we talk about that. And naturally, if you think about everybody who's immigrated to this country, we're all, or not all of us, not us in particular, we talk about Native Americans and Mexicans who have occupied this landmass for ages, but that includes all of the Europeans who migrated over here. And I think, I don't know how that gets lost in the conversation. I don't know how that doesn't get viewed by those folks out there who are against this, who are against asylum seekers, when the Pilgrims were the first asylum seekers.
Let me interrupt you. Does intent matter?
Yes.
Okay, why is that?
Well, I mean, because you can excuse ignorance, you cannot excuse intent. And so, yeah, no, intent matters. And it bothers me that we also leave out of this the idea that African American people who have any descendancy from slavery never immigrated here.
Yeah.
Did not choose to.
Because of intent.
Because of intent. And so you cannot then excuse intent by
Can you
saying,
explain that? I'm sorry. Can you explain?
You just did.
Well, I mean, just that, and I don't want, but that they didn't come with the purpose of capitalizing off of the economy.
Whatever American promise.
That's right.
Dream of
American
an
dream.
promise was.
And in fact, we were, the United States government that built itself from immigrants who, were from Europe, never ever intended for the products of that atrocity to ever be successful. There was never a point in which laws were put into place that went, we got to make it better.
Yeah.
We really need to make some reparations here. We really need to say we're sorry. That's not what happened. There was, minor adjustments to the system so that it would recalibrate itself to allow what is now modern slavery, which is mass incarceration. And then you can even add on some, brown and native folks into that mix and be able to, prosper greatly from that. So I think that that's another part of the conversation that's left out.
So I want to get into, because before we get real specific with what's going on at the border, I want to take care of some of this definitional stuff.
Yeah.
I think it's really important. I believe Brexit, Donald Trump, France, I think collectively the
and
world.
even what just happened in Germany.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
Yes. Absolutely.
Sort of, conceding a lot on what had historically been at least under this particular administration, a very asylum-friendly place. And now, in order to preserve her version of government, there had to be concessions made.
That's right. And so it seems like, I don't know this for a fact, but it seems like the traditional notion of, and I don't want to get too wonky on this, but the traditional notion of nations is experiencing somewhat of an existential crisis. And there's an interesting analogy here with Native people, because Native people are trying to figure out what defines somebody as being Native. So, for example, I was on Twitter the other day, and I posted something about citizenship requirements for Native nations. That it's not a tribe; it's a nation, and that any nation has citizenship requirements. That's a fairly straightforward proposition, and that those nationhood requirements are intended to protect the integrity of what that nation has, what that nation considers to be valuable to it. And once again, I think that's also an uncontroversial position. And there were people that responded and felt like, first of all, they immediately they thought I was talking about blood quantum.
Right.
They thought I was talking about blood quantum. I didn't say that, you said that. But people, irrespective of what their thoughts are on citizenship requirements, there's going to be people that are left in and there's going to be people who are left out. Ultimately, there's going to be people that are not part of that citizenship definition. And one of the responses was interesting to me. A person, I can't remember who it was, but said, I don't think that there should be citizenship requirements at all. And when I see some of the rhetoric that's going on right now from the left, it seems like there's a lot of critique about the structures that are in place regarding citizenship. And I think those critiques are valid. Those critiques are important. Man, this doesn't really reflect who we are. Just like with a native nationhood, that doesn't reflect who we are. Who cares if you're one half blood quantum but you've never been to that homeland, or you've never spoken a word of that language, or whatever it is. But at the same time, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there has to be something. And so to try to figure out existentially what defines us as American in 2018 is probably different than it was in 1908, Ellis Island, was different than it was in 1776, was different than it was at any other different time in life, in history. And so I'm just wondering, do we have to broaden the definition of what it means to be an American? Or is it just recategorizing, redefining in this existential crisis that it seems like we're going through? How do you feel about that?
I mean, I think it's a combination of all of those things. And you know, I think the question of what is American is a question that has been asked and debated for a very long time in this country. And I think the reality is that we're at a place right now where we are reverting back to definitions that probably did exist in 1908 or in 1876 or in 1776, right? Yeah. Americans were defined as people who were Anglo and of European descent, and who had a huge vision around manifest destiny and what that meant for Native communities and the Mexican community is that meant we lost our land to those European settlers, colonizers, whatever you want to call them. Mm-hmm. They took the land, right? Regardless of what title we put on them. I mean, I think for us it's much more important now to focus on sort of, in terms of your definitional question, on sort of the actions of like what people are doing as opposed to the label of who that person might be. But to get back to your question about, you know, sort of how do we define American? The reality is that it's like like us sitting here are still not part of the mainstream definition of American based on physical appearance. Definitely. And I think of the experiences that I have had about people being surprised that I speak English so well. Ooh. About people so good. So good. So good. I apologize. Or people asking me questions like, what do they call Halloween in your country? Mm. Well, they call it Halloween because this is my country, right? And so I think that there is a constant struggle to define what America is and who America is. And sometimes quick question on that. Is that a partisan struggle? For me, I think it's a struggle of morals. Okay. I don't actually think that it's necessarily defined in my mind by politics or by partisanship. Yeah. I think it's a moral struggle for us as a country to accept that Americans are no longer that sort of traditional definition of somebody of European. Yeah, the WASP, if you will, right? And that's not who this country is anymore. In large part because we have been inclusive and have allowed, asylum seekers to settle here, refugee seekers to settle here. We're talking about Vietnam, but whether you're talking about Cambodia or whatever, right? We have allowed our compassion to really drive our American values, and that has in result changed the tapestry of the type of people and where they're from who live here in our country. And we are now in a place where the fragility of white folks has been really put in the spotlight. And it has gotten to a point now where there is, if you put all of us together in terms of communities of color and people of color, we would certainly outnumber the number of European descendants living in this country. And that is a scary concept, I think, for a lot of the folks that we're hearing from very loudly.
Wesley, what do you think?
I just wanted to point out real quick, and we're talking about historical, treatment of immigrants and how this country is. So factually, until 1882, so 1776 to 1882, for more than 100 years, the U.S. imposed no restrictions on immigrants. People that came into the country, if you were a white male immigrant, you could achieve citizenship over about, if you could prove that you had been here for 5 years. And that's all it took. In 1870, they extended naturalization rights to members of African descent, naturally slaves. In 1882, they started to really think about imposing some sort of restrictions, mainly because they try to keep out Asians, apparently. And all this to point out that even up until 1996, immigrants who had entered unlawfully could still legalize your status after 7 years.
Is that right?
In part by paying a civil fine.
Okay.
If you had been here for that long. Once 2001 hit, 9/11, things really started getting upended. But for the longest times, immigration has been a civil matter, and that's what we're seeing changed here with the Trump administration. They're really taking a Justice Department lens, putting in on things, and trying everything criminally, which is creating the crisis we have now.
Minty, we're going to take a break shortly, but take us out. We're at this moment of existential crisis. Who gets to be American, as Wesley pointed out? There's been a pretty inclusive policy toward who be, and I appreciate your viewpoint, because there's the de facto part, which is that it has been inclusive, and then there's the other part, which is that we're not seen as Americans, even though we might fit those definitions, right? For Native people specifically, there was, up until the 1950s, people in New Mexico, people in Arizona, natives in New Mexico, there was sort of a trade-off that those folks, they could be American, they could have the right to vote, have citizenship if they left the reservation, and there was those sort of Faustian exchanges. Minty, are we at this point where we need to talk about no borders, or are we just need to start broadening and thinking differently about citizenship, or something else completely?
I'm not really sure. I think that we have been here before. I think we're here every couple hundred years, it seems like, and clearly we don't learn shit. We haven't learned from the past, because we are definitely right here repeating it. And so I'm not sure really where that tipping point is for this culture that we call American culture. I'm not sure that we're there yet. I'm not sure if this isn't just simply another recalibration, and we're going to go back to, some really backwards thought processes. I can say that, the fact that our current regime is going through a popularity surge lets me know that we are not finished sinking to a new low.
I gotta take a break, but last week on the air, there's a poem by Langston Hughes called I Too. You remember that? I Too. And in it, there's a stanza where he says they've been historically left out of dinner. He was talking specifically about black folks. He wasn't invited to the dinner table. Then it said at some point, we're gonna be at that dinner table, and it's not going to be because you want to, it's going to be because we're too strong.
Right.
Just simple demographics have changed substantially, to the degree that, there is this small cluster of people, relatively small cluster of people, who want perhaps these archaic ideas about separation and exclusivity, and putting us in this bubble that is of whiteness and is of maleness and is of patriarchy. But do you think that really can sustain with the demographics being as overwhelmingly in favor of something else as they are?
No, of course not. It won't sustain, but I believe that it will continue. The bubble's not ready to burst yet. Okay. And just like, there were people during the Nazi times that were like, I don't really have an opinion about what's going on. And people were like, well, I just don't want things to change. And people were like, this is the greatest thing ever. And now you look back, and that's who's remembered in history as absolutely that person. These same people right now are actually going to be remembered like that. And some of us know people who are fine with what's going on, you know, and yet, you know, and I know in 50 years, they're going to be that fool.
Yeah.
And they don't seem to know it. So no, I think it's just, it just kind of does what it does.
Well, and before we go to break, there was a bunch of polls as soon as whack-ass Justice Anthony Kennedy announced his retirement. Because people all of a sudden put him on this pedestal, like this guy's been the guy. And for Native people, at least, he's been a scumbag.
Not the guy.
He's been consistently a scumbag. He also was part of the Muslim ban.
Right.
He was also part of the majority, or actually wrote the majority opinion for Citizens United, which may be the most damaging case in recent history for the Supreme Court. And so people, you know, have this new terror about Roe versus Wade. And I've seen a lot of women writing about this, and rightfully so. Man, no, we can't let this is the litmus test. But then I also know that 53% of white women voted for Donald Trump. And in 2016, Donald Trump said this would be his litmus test of whether they were in favor of Roe v. Wade, and that should be a states' rights decision. So I see those things as inconsistent. I hear what you're saying, that, yeah, sometimes somebody's lying. Somebody's lying. You know, our so-called progressive friends, they're not necessarily so progressive maybe when they're getting in the voting booth, or alternatively, they're just really, really silent.
Right.
So we're going to get back and we're going to talk specifically about some of the horrendous visuals and maybe as importantly, some of the audio that we heard regarding the separating of children from their families at the border, and it's absolutely terrible. Breakdancing Wolves, Indigenous Pirate Radio.
Like that one.
Wesley, yeah.
I like that one. Wesley D. Roach.
Yeah, it was okay. It was okay. I'd give it a B minus. Talk to you soon. Peace. This is Breakdances with Wolves, Indigenous Pirate Radio.
What was that? You know we're on camera.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
I like that. Yeah.
It's
like aggressive gesture.
It's about time you put your back into it a little bit.
Let me bring it back.
Yeah. No, that's
rated R audience.
I want to apologize for my co-host.
that was the twins face. Like getting twins after that face.
Not privileged.
Yeah. We heard a pretty cool sort of academic, it was more academic conversation, the first half of the conversation, about citizenship, about nationhood, and sort of how it's progressed or regressed, or however your viewpoint is historically. And I want to get a little bit more specific in this portion of our conversation. Minty and I had a good conversation. It was actually preceded by, you all notice my hair is shorter now. My auntie, Leona Eagle Speaker, passed on a couple weeks ago. And we talked about the difficulty that Native people have oftentimes with losing, loss. And I believe that goes back to historical times with boarding schools, but even before boarding schools, where, as we were just talking about, you mentioned Comanche going from, would you say, from 10,000?
From 50,000 to 1,400.
50,000 to 1,400 people. And there's many comparable statistics with that. And so there was this real notion, and this is a matter of demonstrable as well as empirical data, but also the stories, forget all that data. The stories are powerful. I remember my grandpa talking about when he got pulled away to boarding school. He got pulled away as a young child and to Durham boarding school, Indian school. And he had no clue who these people were. I've never seen these people before in my life. Why are they so pale? Not being funny, this is really the thought. I have no clue who these people are. They're speaking a funny language, because even as an old man, my grandfather passed at 70 years old, he barely spoke English at that point. So his exposure to English, you know, as a young child, 5, 6 years old, was much less. And you're just gone. No explanation to the parents, no explanation to the child. And if, because it wasn't a guaranteed thing, if that child came back, as has been chronicled many times, there's a lot of stories about it in this book called Army versus Carlisle. And it talked about how those children who were taken to Carlisle Indian School, when they did go back, oftentimes those kids came from the Dakotas. And they just didn't fit in. So they just stayed gone. And those were the kids that were actually still alive. That's not the 49,860 that just died of those Comanche people or of any particular nation. They're just gone, just gone. I have no clue. And so I believe that a lot of times Native people, our difficulty with loss comes from that time. Man, I don't know what happened to that person. We see it now with missing and murdered Indigenous women. There's this sense of, there's a certain amount of privilege that happens when you know what happened to that loved one. But when somebody just disappears, there's that longing. Man, maybe they're still alive. I don't know. And there's just that sense, that profound and deep sense of loss that you can never, ever get back. And I see that now. I see that now, the potential for that now with what's going on at the border. Where you have children who are being traumatized. I remember when I first moved up here, I wasn't with my mom for 2 years. And that was hard. I was mama's boy. And I wasn't with either of my parents for a while. And that still to this day is something that impacts me. I still think about it. Me and my son have conversations about it. And I can't imagine what's happening to these kids with no explanation, no context. That these children likely are going to have lifelong effects as a result of this. You know, not on a political level, forget the politics. Forget Republican, Democrat, at least me. Feel free to talk about whatever you want. But just on a human level, there's going to be a generation of children that are hurt and who are, I think, oftentimes trying to fill that void. So what's going on at the border, I guess in short, is that there's really, really, really going to be a lot of human cost. Wesley, when I say what's going on at the border, what's really going on at the border?
We're talking about family separation, which has seen a resurgence of sorts compared to the Obama administration treating most of these immigration cases as civil matters. And with the Trump administration, their approach has been largely criminal. And this leads to family separation because they will try the adult separate from the child, and they will try the child separate from the adult. They've instituted a zero tolerance policy. This has flooded the criminal court systems, which were not ready to handle something like this. There's something like 700,000, over 700,000 cases now, criminal cases, immigration cases, and there are about, I think, 200 judges, so a little over 200 judges, close to there. And so we're seeing, in large part, a lot of these children need to be detained somewhere. The families need to be detained somewhere. The men and women need to be children. And so far, they've been paid in Walmart centers, other prison detention centers. Some have been sent off to live with families already, and to find spaces and places where they can be, where they're not clogging into court systems or detention centers. And this has all been happening in the past couple of years. The criminal cases have really been turned up the past few months, and the zero tolerance policy of that. And so now the Trump administration is being forced within 30 days to reunify all these families. They've got till July 26th to reunite all these families. Over 3,000 children. We're talking about the numbers now are 3,000 children that are out, gone, and largely can't be located in some cases.
Lorena, how does this make you feel? I mean, what's your, it's a big question, but please answer as big as you want. You know, how does it make you feel?
It is, I mean, it's hard to even talk about it. It is, you know, I'm disgusted. I'm ashamed of who we are in this moment in America. And I'm just horrified that this is actually happening at a big scale, in a way that we haven't seen in a while. Because it's always happened, right? Like separating families goes back. It has a very long history in this country, and so, you know, I think that what is shocking to me is that I thought that we had gotten beyond those archaic, inhumane, you know, practices, but we haven't. And this is an example of that. But I'm also just really angry.
Yeah, I bet.
I'm mad that, you know, like, we have all struggled so much to get to where we're at now, and to be systemically and systematically dehumanized this way is just infuriating. And I you know, sometimes I just feel like screaming, because you know, you know, what do you do when some of these fringe people that you were talking about earlier, you know, these people who have these long-held beliefs that America should continue to be white, right? The problem with that is that those few people are in power right now in terms of government. They are the ones who are calling the shots around who gets separated and who doesn't get separated. Right? You don't see Canadians being separated at the border, at the U.S.-Canadian border. That's for a reason. These are Honduran and Salvadorian refugees. They are trying to escape some of the most atrocious human rights violations and crises in their own country right now. And we've had a long tradition of welcoming them here. I've heard stories of women literally seeing Customs and Border Patrol and waving them down because in their mind, they finally made it. They finally made it here, and they're gonna be able to tell that agent right there that they are here to seek asylum. And instead what has happened is that their children are ripped away from them without even the courtesy of being told why or what's happening, or whether it's part of the asylum process or something else. Literally, a child as young as 8 months old who is still breastfeeding, ripped away from his mother. And make no mistake of it, it is because these are brown, and in some cases indigenous people from Central America who are coming into our country. And so, you know, this is what white nationalism and white supremacy looks like. Is this. And for us, I think, as people who are experiencing this for the first time in our lived history, it's a lot to take in. But, you know, I think about the story you just told about your grandfather. You know, if he was still around, I'm sure this would all look very familiar.
You know, and I think, and Minty, I want to get to you in a second. There's a couple of things you always trigger a bunch of thoughts. One is that, from my understanding, geopolitics is not my specialty, but the reason why a lot of those folks are seeking asylum is because of conditions that the United States created.
Absolutely.
And it obviously, you know, the United States has been tangled up in so many different things that it's probably hard to separate and to extrapolate, oh, well, we caused this, we caused that. But it seems especially perverse to have created a condition amongst indigenous people, brown-skinned indigenous people, and that replicates history, a historical trend, and then say, you've created this condition yourself, and further exacerbate that condition by separating that. It seems like history replaying itself many times within a very short period of time, one particular transaction. The other thought was that, and this is something that my family hasn't really experienced. The boarding school is something that's very profound within my family. But there was, in 1978, an act of Congress that was passed called the Indian Child Welfare Act. And that act of Congress was passed because not only this boarding school process, but there was something called the Indian Adoption Agency. And it was intended to essentially be an extension of the policy, Native American education policy, which was kill the Indian and say, man, we're going to put you with a white family and you're going to become a white person, and they're going to take away all those elements of being Native. And I wonder about those kids. I wonder about what's happening with those kids at the border and what the intent with those kids are. I don't know. That might be my conspiracy.
Well, I mean, they are being placed with sponsor families.
Yeah.
In some instances, because the government did, the ICE and Customs and Border Patrol was not ready for the volume of how many human lives would be impacted as a result of the zero tolerance policy. And so, because they don't have enough space in detention centers, or because we're trying to get around this 20-day, there's a 20-day limit that is imposed, I think, by a court in California on the federal government that says you cannot keep a child in detention for greater than 20 days. So the fix for that is to find sponsors, people who can house these children until they're reunified with their families. And so again, the similarities between what happens to Native folks and what is happening now is shockingly similar. It's almost as though they went into the Smithsonian Library, found the chapter on how to separate Indian people from back in the day, dusted it off, and are now using that play
on more Native people.
On more Native people, right? And so I think that is part of this plan. And unfortunately, there is no clear plan. There is no plan on how these kids are going to be reunified. And to an extent, I'm excited. I'm thrilled that there was a court who, once again, bopped the Trump administration on the head and saying, you gotta return these kids within 30 days, you gotta reunify them within 30 days. But what was the response to that?
Yeah.
The response is like, okay, great, we're gonna reunify them in jail.
Yeah.
So the zero tolerance policy that centers itself on creating traumatic experiences for people who would otherwise be able to legally qualify for some form of relief in our country by virtue of being an asylee or a refugee is gone. And that is who we are becoming as America. And it's up to those who believe that we need to continue to be a welcoming city to people who are fleeing circumstances, economic, domestic violence, sexual abuse, drug trafficking, many of which we have contributed to as a country, as an institution. We have contributed to those circumstances in those foreign countries. It's up to us to really sort of say, we're not going to allow that to happen.
Minty, I know that we've talked about it before, how the Indian Child Welfare Act and the lack of Indian Child Welfare Act pre-1978 was very formative in you and your family's life. What does this trigger anything? What's going on with you?
It triggers all that, and it triggers also being ripped from a person a parent that was also of African descent, because it's layers to all this, right? And so, as a Native woman, as a Black woman, and then we are sorority sisters in a non-traditional sorority that is service-based and multicultural, and it was founded by indigenous Latino women. And so there's some real triggering on a lot of levels. And I also think that, people don't understand, adoptions are happening right now.
Yeah.
There was a 5-year-old boy whose, placement in Missouri went, yeah, you can't rip them from our home. It's the same thing you hear. There are local children being ripped from their home right now, today, and they are not being placed with their grandmother. They're not being placed with their cousin. They're being placed with a white couple that's always wanted to have kids that's down in Bismarck. Like, we are not talking about this. This is still happening all the time. And so I think that watching it on this level is different because we didn't have cell phones. We couldn't have seen this go down. We didn't know how to be able to disseminate the information real time, and now we have audio. We have all of this technology, and people are still able to look at this and go, they brought it on themselves, or justify it in a million different other ways.
Or these aren't American children.
Or these aren't American children. Yeah, and yet I saw a statistic that said 660,000 undocumented Europeans are here, and none of their children are being removed. So yes, this is entirely racist, and this is about something we've seen before many, many times. And I'm the older person in the room at 27. And so I feel like
barely.
And I think that for me, there is this, I'm a grandmother, and there's this like paralyzing fear when I start to even go down that road of, my gosh, my grandsons are the descendants of people of shithole countries, the descendants of people who were stolen, the descendants of people, and yet my grandson's also mixed with people who support this administration, and they're okay with this. And so there's a lot of stuff going on where I don't know how to get us past this place in our own family as a family, but as a collective community, we are going to be experiencing this because there are 3,000 missing children that we know of. We also know for every lie that they tell, there's 50 more that we haven't heard yet. So I think that there's probably way more than 3,000 children out there. And there is a real market. Let's be real. There is a market for placing our brown and black and red children. And however you want to look at it, that's what's going on some level. There are children being placed and adopted into homes, and people are not going to talk about it, because it continues to benefit that process of using us as chattel, using us as commodities.
There's a case right now that there's an institute, it's called the Goldwater Institute. It's a think tank, it's a conservative think tank named after Barry Goldwater. And they're bringing a case trying to get cert to the Supreme Court. It's called Brackeen. Brackeen, look it up, Brackeen. And what it is it says that Indian Child Welfare Act is racist.
Yes.
It's racist because this white couple wants this native kid out of Texas, and God, they can't have this thing. You can't have access to everything. Can't take your kid. And
white people, you can't have everything.
you can't.
Sometimes you have to accept no.
Right.
No.
And it's amazing to me the manipulation of the legal system that you and I signed up for, and I see it played out oftentimes. We had this conversation when the Ninth Circuit struck down the Muslim ban and said it's unconstitutional. And I told everybody, I said, they're gonna lose at the Supreme Court. They're gonna lose at the Supreme Court, because they basically gave them a roadmap. If you do this, this, and this, add Venezuela, add North Korea. They didn't say those specific nations, but then it'd be constitutional. That's right, no. It's like Chris Rock. Chris Rock said, it seems like by now, the police would realize we should shoot a white kid every once in a while. And, just throw the scent off a little bit.
Just to keep up with the appearance.
And I have a horrible, horrible feeling that even though the Ninth Circuit said that this right now is unconstitutional. That this is going to, all that is it's a bump in volleyball. It's a setup for somebody, the Supreme Court, to spike it, and especially with this new justice who's going to come in, and I have a horrible fear about that. Legally, putting on one of your other hats.
Putting it on.
Yeah, one of your other hats.
Thank you. Thank you.
What's our recourse? What do you see as something that we can do? I mean, obviously we can get out there and have rallies and stuff like that, but what else can we do?
Yeah, I mean, so, you know, I went into law because I wanted to use law for good.
Mm-hmm.
And I came up in this world as a microfarm worker, and lived in microfarm labor camps. I saw tons of abuses and felt voiceless and helpless, and couldn't help my own family, couldn't help other microfarm workers who were experiencing just really atrocious workplace violations. And so I went to law school because I wanted to be able to help people and to use the law to create great social change. The reality is, however, is that there are plenty of lawyers out there and interests who want to use the law to maintain status quo.
Or even go backwards.
Or even to go backwards, right? Or to go back to a status quo that they like better.
Yes.
Right? And I think there was a story around, you brought up Roe versus Wade. There's a story, I think that just was published in the Washington Post recently, just in the last couple of days. It talks about how getting to this point where Kennedy is retiring and there's going to be a pro-life Supreme Court justice appointed has been the work of 10 years.
Yes.
I mean, the other side is committed.
Yes.
Right? They got a plan, they got money, and they got people in power.
Yes.
Right? So it's the trifecta.
And patience.
And lots of patience, man.
Yes.
They will stay the course.
Yeah.
I think for us as a movement and as movement of justice, we have to be willing to adopt some of the same principles and use them for good. Right?
Okay.
We have a very short attention span. My biggest fear, just like the one you described, is that after the cameras get bored of the family separation, plus there isn't a crying child to be recorded, the cameras are going to leave, and America's going to move.
And Trump's going to piss them off in some other way.
Trump's going to piss them off in some other way, and it's going to be sort of a squirrel effect, is what I call it. And the reality is that he's probably doing the zero tolerance policy to distract us from some other atrocious thing that he's doing, like pulling us out of the UN Human Rights Coalition. He's doing massive interior immigration enforcement right now, and he's gutting SNAP and other food benefits for.
That's happening right now.
That's happening right now.
Welfare, yeah.
Reversing the.
What's SNAP? Just real quick.
SNAP is the program that allows low-income, middle-income families to access money from the government subsidies to be able to buy food.
Food stamps.
Food stamps.
Yeah.
As we like to, as they used to be, I think now they call it AT or whatever, everything's on an ATM, but it used to be this cool little booklet look like fake money. And we know what food stamps look like. My family has them.
Yeah, the book stamps. Yeah, you didn't play around. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, those things had value. I'm balling. I got
Look at all this money.
My freshman year in college.
Yeah.
Thank God for So anyway, yes.
So this is a program that is being completely gutted right now by
Yeah.
the Trump administration and his cronies in Congress, right? All of this is happening while zero tolerance policy is occurring.
Mm-hmm.
And this president is a master in the art of distraction.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important for us to continue to stay focused on not just the single thing that's getting all the media attention right now, but what else is happening behind the screen, right?
Yeah.
What are the other things? What are the other dismantling things that he's doing to create more people throughout our country? And so in terms of this issue, I think that because once the media stops paying attention, and then Americans are going to start paying attention, then I think it's really important for us to make sure that we are funding the organizations on the ground who've been doing this work for a long time.
Right.
Way before the cameras showed up down on the US Mexico border, right?
Yeah.
Like they're the ones who are going to be there. They're the ones who are going to continue to organize. They're the ones who are going to continue to provide the services and make sure that these kids and their parents are connected with lawyers who are going to be there to do good, not evil, and to fight the fight on making sure the long-term legal fight that is going to be necessary to reunify these kids with their parents. But in the meantime, folks gotta get online and they gotta donate to organizations like One America. There's the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project, which is providing legal services to separated families who are in the CTAC detention facility. There's Kind, Kids in Need of Defense. That's an organization that focuses specifically on these types of cases.
Yeah.
They're a national organization. There's an organization called RAICES, R-A-I-C-E-S, based in Texas.
Texas, yeah.
Doing amazing work. Texas Civil Rights Project, also doing amazing work there. They're going to need the funding to be able to continue to do this work long after the media stops paying attention to it and you know, giving people the headlines that they want to hear. So
I love that. Thank you for that. I mean, that's still a lot of work, but at least there's a plan behind it.
I think there's a plan behind it, and you know, one of the things that we've been talking about in the immigrant rights movement is like we got to be able to not just deal with the short-term emergency circumstances happening right here, but how do we build power within immigrant and refugee communities to allow us to really be better represented at all levels of government, right? And so it's going to be about how do we build that political power to hold these systems accountable to the people, and the best way to do that is to elect people who come from.
Love it. We're going to get ready to go into our last very short segment with 3 things that we're feeling. You know about 3 things that we're feeling?
I know. Tell me about the 3 things you're feeling.
Go ahead.
This is like lowlights, highlights.
Yeah.
At the end of every show, we like to do 3 things, and it can be anything you're feeling, you know, from like whatever TV show you're hooked on to whatever. It doesn't even have to be about, you know, anything current events. It could be whatever you're feeling, however you define this.
It's causing emotion. Got you in your feelings.
And
Got
it's just
you.
quick little snippets.
Yeah, but before we do that, any thoughts on what we do here? Like, how do we be constructive? We can't just complain about it. The Jack Nicholson, right? As good as it gets. We can't just be describing the water.
Right.
We got to actually figure out the life raft. We got to figure out the mechanism that's going to help to get out of that water. So, any thoughts on where we go from here?
It's just sad. It's sad. It's really sad and disheartening looking at the whole thing, because you know this is creating a lot of trauma that will extend far beyond just the children. Their children will probably feel it. As we know, intergenerational trauma as natives, and this is hard to cope with. The loss of family, the loss of people that are immediate to you, and not having anyone around you. For me, it's not hopeful, and I don't know how many organizations are out there to help. I'm thankful that you mentioned all of it, because those are really the powerhouses that are going to continue this work. After most everybody puts their heads down and gets back to baseball or whatever. It's really sad, you know, because these children are really going to go through something later in life that makes it hard to cope and to be successful, which I think is part of the long-term goals of a regime like this, an administration like this, that is putting forth efforts that are attempting families and partners with ground families. And I think it's going to have lasting impacts on their economic status as a whole.
And regardless of like, yeah, we have this nice order that says 30 days
Right,
to get it back
right.
together, but trauma's been caused. Like damage has been done.
You know, I read this article one time about how within, specifically, I think it was with Baltimore, the Baltimore Black chapter of the Black Panthers, they did some sort of studies in the early 70s about police officers that we just heard the sirens outside, how they would put the sirens on. And the reason why was to always create a frenetic energy, to always create panic. And what that frenetic and panicking energy created was fear. You started to associate that constant noise, that constant motion, that energy with, oh, something bad happened. And maybe I've been called a conspiracy theorist, I think many times by Wesley Snipes type, but I can see an argument that we know that within many communities, the Latinx vote is going to be, it's the emerging vote, and oftentimes is actually the vote now that is going to put whomever in office or not put whomever in office. And I think that there's a possibility, or maybe even a probability, that those individuals, those people, no matter what their circumstances, their immigration status, they are recognized as citizens. However it is, I see them as less likely to be involved with those political processes as a result of this noise that's going on, these sirens that are going around, because they just don't want to be noticed. That's the reason why I'm so. There's a person on social media I follow. He has a Twitter and Instagram page. It's called Undocumented Media, and it's all these undocumented folks who are saying that they're undocumented and unafraid. And like, nah, you're not going to scare me away from this. You're not going to keep me, like, I understand I'm vulnerable, but I'm still going to commit. And that's such a powerful sentiment, because that's not, I believe, based upon history, not just based upon conjecture, but based upon history, that's not the expected response from this. The expected response, just like at the boarding schools when you didn't speak English, and so you learned to be quiet because you didn't want to be called on, and you knew that if you spoke your native tongue, you would be punished for that. So I'm just going to be quiet. I'm just going to be quiet. And that's the expected response, is fear. And when I see something different from that, those people who did speak up, those people who were willing to take that punishment in the boarding schools, those people who were willing to, get kicked out of school, those people who were willing to get punished, who were willing to get beaten. And I'm not saying anybody should get beaten, but when you see that I guess people call it resistance now, but that word's been largely co-opted by white people, who are just talking about Trump specifically. That's been going on for a long time. When I see that, that's such a powerful sentiment, and I'm glad, and so I hope that there's a lot of that spirit, that you're not going to shut me up. I know there might be consequences, and I'm speaking from a position of privilege as a natural-born citizen, and I acknowledge that, I understand that. But when I see that, I'm so happy, because I believe, my conspiracy theorist brain once again believes that that's ultimately the intent with a lot of this, irrespective of what those people, with the outcome of their asylum cases is, that they're going to be fearful. And I hope that in fact they realize that they can't be complicit in the silence, the disquieting of them. So we'll be back with 3 things that we're feeling very shortly. Council member Lorena Gonzalez, Wesley Snipes type, Minty, Long Earth, Mama Mint Diva, Breakdancing Wolves, Indigenous Pirate Radio. Shout out to our sponsor, Emerald Queen Casino, the best seafood buffet in the whole damn universe. Like the Crab Nebula. They have that in their seafood buffet. We'll be back shortly. Peace. This is Breakdances with Wolves, Indigenous Pirate Radio. What was the action with the water?
I was Malay with Tony, bro.
Right, man.
Okay.
Pound it.
She left you hanging, yeah.
I left you hanging. I saw it.
Team player.
Yeah, definitely team player.
She held you down there. She shouldn't have.
No, she was right.
She shouldn't have, but
I'm sorry.
Lorena, can you come back?
just beat his pound person.
See my random
Thing, cousin Ed, right? We've had hopefully a very illuminating conversation about the separation of families at the borders. As Councilmember Gonzalez pointed out, it's not a new thing. And there's going to be a movement very shortly, just because it's just a news cycle.
Yeah.
Boom and bust, just like the economy. It's gonna go someplace else. Good, guaranteed, 100%. Just like we're not talking about Parkland right now. We're not talking about gun control right now. It's going to go someplace else. And so hopefully there's enough of us through this mechanism of breakdancing wolves and Digit Radio, or through other mechanisms, through the organizations that were mentioned, through just perseverance and you folks' integrity and our integrity. Hopefully we continue to talk about this, and hopefully we continue to support those organizations that are doing the work, because we can't be every place, but we can throw a few dollars that way if we have a few dollars to spare. Not all of us have a few dollars to spare, but if we can kick, okay, we need you to do this work. And that's going to be the challenge, is this cycle, as much as everybody's crying about it and posting it on Instagram, it's going to be gone. It's going to be gone out of the public consciousness very shortly, and we need to make sure that we continue to support that work. Now we get to the sort of entertaining part of this program, and that is the feature that we call 3 Things That We're Feeling. 3 things. And I'm going to start off just because, I know what I'm feeling right now. I'm feeling.
You're going to show some leadership.
Yeah, I'm going to show a little leadership. A little bit.
About time.
We went to watch this movie called Purge, the first Purge.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, but you don't go to Purge movies for plot. You go there for some cool little political subtext. Like, there's literally a moment where a woman, I'm quoting because everybody knows I don't talk like this, but there's a moment where the protagonist, she gets kind of snared onto a gate. She falls down, and so these guys are trying to get her because this is the first purge, and so they're just kind of trying to figure out how to behave in a purge. That's the plot, is that they don't know how to behave in a purge. And so it's an experiment.
This is the new one.
Yeah. They don't know how to behave. Yeah, it's out. Okay. And so they're grabbing at her. And one of the people, the guy tries to grab her in the genital area. And she says, she gets away, she hits him, and I don't remember what, but she's able to get away. And she says, she looks at him and says, "Effing pussy grabber." So they got the political, they do that really, really well.
I'm still not watching it.
I understand. I like violence, but I like violence. And then
Put some context with it.
Right. My guy, Van Jones, one of my buddies, he's in the show. He actually makes an appearance as a reporter. And, he's a horrible actor. But the thing is that everybody in a Purge movie is a horrible actor. So he's not an actor. He's really good at what he does, which is as a commentator. But, the movie, he's a horrible actor and he fits in. But it's an entertaining movie. The second thing that I'm feeling is, we just passed the 4th of July. And now it's kind of trendy to be woke. Everybody's super woke.
4th of July.
Just in general. Activism is hot right now. Activism.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
No, it really is though. It really is. You see it on all levels. And I think that just like during my childhood, when I remember 1989 is the number. Another summer, get down, sound of the funky drummer. Public Enemy, Poor Righteous Teachers, Boogie Down Production, everybody was making quote unquote conscious hip hop. And then 2 years later, conscious hip hop's gone. I think this is likewise a trend. And that might be unpopular to say, but I think people are going to lose focus because that's what we do. We cycles, right? And my family historically had a fireworks stand. I never really got into the patriotism of it. I don't consider myself a great patriot. Other than I think that patriotism is aspirational, and I think that the United States, if we want to live up to the exceptionalism that we purport, that we need to keep pushing and critique harder than ever the United States. But all that aside, I love the 4th of July. I love the 4th of July because my family, we just go out and we sell fireworks to white people. I'm going to sell you some disposable and explosive patriotism that's going to be gone, that was imported from China, and that's fun. And we're gonna enrich our coffers just a little bit. You know, a little bit, tiny reparations, $5 firecracker packs at a time. And so, you know, I had a great time. I hung out with my Uncle Dave, and I also hung out with my guy Dave Bean, who's been featured on the show several times, council member for the Puyallup tribe. The welcoming people are also the hosts of the canoe journey that's coming up in a couple weeks. So that's a cool thing. That's the third thing that I'm feeling is that it's preparation time for that. And it's just ceremony time, it's powwow time. It's a wonderful time to be Native. It's the best time in the world to be Native because this is when everything happens. All of our fertility stuff, just in case, you know, somebody wants some fertility stuff.
Everybody pregnant.
Right. All the harvest stuff, all of those things. It's a great time. We're getting ready to go to North American Indian Days, Browning, Montana. We just had Muckleshoot Veterans Powwow. It's a beautiful time to be indigenous. So that's the 3 things that I'm feeling. Count.
Oh, I get to go next.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for having me here.
Thank you.
You guys got vacation, Lorena.
Yeah.
Means I'm sweaty, no makeup, and wearing yoga pants.
You're wonderful. Look great.
No, so let's see. 3 things that I'm feeling. So last week it was a dumpster fire. Like the entire week was just garbage.
Yeah.
And you know, we took hits on the fake legal clinics, women's reproductive health, labor unions were under attack, the Muslim ban was upheld, family separations continue. And so you might be wondering, why is that something that I'm feeling?
Right.
I'm feeling it because last week I got to spend a lot of time out in community with, you know, people I've been in the struggle with for a long time. And it just felt good to be back and connected and just, and really just sort of in the spirit of solidarity and coming together and just being, you know, resilient. Like we've always been, right? Like resiliency is the thing that is, you know, we are survivors no matter what.
Sometimes that's all we have.
Sometimes it's the only thing we have. And I agree with you. I tend to shy away from resistance because I feel like it's so negative. And for me, it's like I want to focus on the fact that like we are a community that knows how to survive. Atrociously know how to survive, right? And we will overcome. This is a dark moment in our collective history, but it just felt really just solid in community and surrounded by people that I love and respect and adore, and just that was amazing. The second thing is I'm feeling the World Cup. I'm a big soccer fan, and
what's there, 8 teams left?
I'm not feeling the fact that Mexico got knocked out by Tennessee, but whatever. So it's just we're down to the eight final teams, and there's 2 games every other day between now and the 16th of July. So I'm very excited about seeing how the bracket plays out.
Does this mean that there's money on the line?
There's a free cocktail involved.
Okay.
Nice. And I want it. Unfortunately, my husband's feeding me right now, so
okay.
It's too bad. But I like the World Cup, you know, with all the stuff that's happening, it's been nice to just sort of see the various countries in the world on this like national stage, and it's like been a little bit of a distraction for me. And it's been fun. It's been fun to be like
distractions are okay.
Roll out in Seattle wearing all my Mexico gear, and then my like very white, Germanic, Welsh, Scottish husband also geared out in Mexico stuff.
Now, when you wear Mexican jersey, does that include Cortez?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm not trying to get arrested. Get asked to go like get some food out the kitchen.
Right.
Respectable, but nicer kids.
Okay, I'm just checking.
Yeah, so it's been a lot of fun to just get the World Cup. And then the third thing that I'm feeling was I just I just came back today from Central Washington, from seeing my mom and my brothers and nephews, and it always feels good to be back where it's home.
Yeah.
And where nobody really recognizes me, and I get a lot of humble pie the entire time I'm there, which is what I like. So it just felt really good to eat all my mom's food, those fresh handmade corn tortillas, and she made, soups and meats and just like beans and homemade salsa, and like it just I'm even getting hungry now. And so it just felt really, really nice to just be at home in the house that I grew up in, chilling, talking in my other language, because I've been fully working all my life, but being able to just sit at home and just be.
Yeah.
And so it was a nice way to
not council member Gonzalez.
No, just.
Do you have a nickname?
Lorena.
Okay.
I was waiting to see if you were going to say it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Or Lori.
Yeah.
It's been very good.
But at home.
Or Lori.
The struggle around assimilation is real.
Right.
Yeah. I didn't find out my real name was Maria until I was in 6th grade.
Really?
So bring me back for your identity show. I found my birth certificate and I was like, who's this Maria Lorena Gonzalez? Is that me? She's got my birthday.
Nice.
Those are the
It's my cousin.
It's my cousin.
Oh, my 3 things. So, Mary Lagarde is the executive director of the Minneapolis American Indian Center. And she ran several successful programs to serve our Native community in Minneapolis, which is huge, which includes specifically at Little Earth. And if you've never been to Minneapolis, man, you've got to see Little Earth, you've got to see the American Indian Center, you've got to see what it's like to have a different way of how urban natives can live in a major city. And, when I was little, there was a little tiny neighborhood in the South End that, you knew you were going to see everybody native and Samoan and, in the same area. But this is different. This is like, services and community. And Mary Lagarde, I could have sat there and listened to her all day. So that's the first thing I'm feeling. And thank you for your hospitality. It's good to hang out and had a great time. Second thing I'm feeling is Netflix just released W. Kamau Bell's concert.
Is it good?
It is hilarious. I was on the plane howling.
Really?
I was cracking up. It was so crazy. It's called, I'm trying to take crazy out of my...
Like something like Square Kid or something like that?
No, it's Private School Negro.
Oh, right. Square Kid.
Yeah, and he did it at Berkeley.
Like I said.
Yes.
Berkeley. And he just, I like United Shades of America. This was...
But he's not funny in there.
Right, this was that, but funny.
Okay.
That's what I like. It was so funny.
Okay.
And he really went there on a lot of things that, needed to be said. So that's the second thing I'm feeling. The third thing is our friend is getting married on Saturday, and so I want to give love and shout out to John Eckloff. Have a great wedding.
Is he getting married?
He's getting married.
I didn't know.
He's getting married. I tried to hang out with my daughter Angelina, and she ditched me because she's going to that wedding. So
Okay.
Yeah.
John, that's my guy.
No. The old heads didn't give up, and we could have recorded there. Break dance with Wills and Digits right already. But that's okay. We'll see you soon, man. What you got?
3 things. I'm gonna start out a little light. I recently got back into Family Matters. We got Hulu.
Why?
My partner's a big fan, so we've been watching.
If anybody, we have a job opening. We have a job opening.
That show is remarkably better than I remember.
Wow.
And which is something to say, because like you watch Full House, it's corny. Like
I hated Full House.
All those, yeah.
One of the worst shows ever.
Really?
The little girls.
It was very unrealistic.
Was it me that I fell found them creepy.
The Olsen twins?
Yeah, like children of the corn.
Yeah. No, I think like the girls on the big wheel in Shining. Yeah. Yeah.
We're sorry, we're taking away.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Family, did I do that? Like it's just great.
No,
It's
no,
great
no.
watch. Bring it back.
I loved Family Matters.
It's still a great
Oh,
show. It's a good. Thank you.
Man.
Coming back next week.
I love it. Come on now, Steve Urkel, who doesn't love Steve
It's been
Urkel?
great.
I don't
It's
love
been
Steve
great.
Urkel.
I'm in that camp too.
Y'all like Stefan though, I bet.
No, I didn't see
He was the smooth Urkel, right?
He was the-
That's right.
He was the non-suspect.
Yeah, he didn't mess things up. He was great. I haven't got there yet. We'll get back into that, but it's just great to be there. Second thing, Scott Pruitt is gone.
It's a big deal.
That is a big
But
deal.
kind of.
It's kind of right. We're still under the umbrella of this regime, but
And there's also, I don't mean to interrupt, but I was thinking about this earlier because I see people celebrating that, but it's always, just like Kennedy, just like any of these positions, it's the evil you know versus the evil you don't know.
Right.
And I don't doubt the Trump administration's unique ability to go find Skeletor that he needs a job. You know, to find somebody that's particularly evil. So I don't mean to interrupt, but
it's fair. That's absolutely fair, and that's my thought process too. Scott Pruitt was one of those Skeletor dudes, though, coming from somewhere where he had filed lawsuits against the EPA, where he was actively trying to dismantle the EPA before he became head of the EPA. So having gone is a great thing, especially how corrupt he was and doing all sorts of crazy stuff in that office. The hope is that there's someone better coming, or I don't know. It's
Just
very-
not
You're
as
optimistic.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
God bless me. Because it's terrible. And then the last thing, you talked a little bit about the ceremony. This is ceremony time, and there are some good brothers right now heading back for Amblecha and we walk on Chippy, which is Sundance, and one request. So those are happening right now in the midst of that. There are good brothers and sisters out there offering themselves up in a good way for our people. And that's what Powwow is about, that's what these ceremonies are about. So it's a great time to be indigenous, absolutely.
yes, it is. Councilmember Gonzalez, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Keep you around.
Yeah. This is it's an important conversation, folks. We got to keep our attention span, keep our eyes on the prize.
And working together.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, find reasons to work together.
Yeah.
And you know, and honestly, and I can't speak for anybody else, and especially for anybody that's in political position, but we have to keep our white allies accountable. We have to. Because they're going to get distracted, and they should, because we're going to get distracted too. But we have to make sure that they don't lose track, as they are wont to do, as soon as that liberal anger towards Trump. Because that's, just to reiterate, that's the thing that makes me particularly suspicious, is that it seems like a specific white liberal sentiment that we're going to center anything, whether it be the Muslim man, whether it be the separation of families, whether it be Roe v. Wade, around the boogeyman. And once the boogeyman's gone, or the boogeyman's moved on, then it's okay. And it's not okay. It's not okay. That assault has been ongoing for a very long time. And so just to keep our eyes on the prize, shout out to our sponsors, the welcoming people, the welcoming and generous people, Puyallup Tribe, Puyallup Nation, Emerald Queen Casino, Seafood Buffet. I think Boz Scaggs is going to be there. Smoothest white boy in the world.
Man.
Right up there with George Michael and Ric Flair. One of my
You
favorite
got knowledge
members.
of my wife, though.
I do.
You
I do.
definitely know that's my wife.
I do, absolutely.
That is true.
Absolutely. Breakdance Wolves, Indigenous Pirate Radio. We'll talk to you soon.
Yay, we're